Hello and welcome to the FT's Brexit debates, where we invite a series of speakers on either side of the argument as to whether Britain should stay in the EU or not, to come and make their case and then challenge one another through questions. Today up for debate is the proposal Brexit would damage the UK. Supporting the statement is Tristram Hunt, Labour MP and historian. Speaking against is Steven Woolfe, MEP for the UK Independence Party and that party's spokesman on financial affairs. Welcome, thank you for both coming in. You're now both going to have 1 minute each to speak for or against the motion that Brexit would damage the UK. There will then be an opportunity to challenge each other with questions. Tristram Hunt, I'd like you to go first, speaking to the motion Brexit will damage the UK.
My contention is that Brexit would damage the UK because, quite simply, we are stronger, safer and better off in the European Union. We would be needlessly excluding ourselves from a market of 500 million people, a market that takes 50% of our exports. We'd also be excluding ourselves from one of the great progressive political forces in the world. If we want the British voice heard on climate change, on sustainable trade, on human rights, well, the European Union is the vehicle to do it through. But I want more than that. I actually want Britain to lead in Europe. So this debate seems to me not only a case for staying in, but then the kind of Europe that Britain should be forging in the future.
Thank you very much, Tristram Hunt. Steven Woolfe.
For 18 years, I worked as a compliance officer and general counsel here in the City of London, one of the most important industries that our country has. During that time, I advised businesses such as Credit Suisse, UBS and Barclays Capital on the impending regulation from the European Union. I watched as more and more regulations slowed us down, created costs, increased the lack of productivity and made sure that our businesses were less competitive in a globalized world. And yet when we went to Europe to try and change those regulations, we found that we had no voice out there. What I believe is that in that industry, as in so many others, that if we left the European Union, we would enter into an age of prosperity, where our people would have the opportunity to trade with Europe on their regulations, but actually be free, to have freer regulations, lower costs, and greater competitiveness across the globe. That is what Britain has always done, and that's what I believe we will do again.
Steven Woolfe, thank you very much. Now, if you'd both like to turn to one another, you're now going to have an opportunity to challenge each other through questions. Tristram Hunt, you go first. Question to Steven Woolfe, please.
I think, Stephen, I'd like to pick up on this voice that we would trade in Europe, but as you say, under their regulations. Now, if we left Europe but wanted to trade with the single market, we would have to pay, but we'd have no say. We'd be like Norway, having to accept the regulations that you say we'd trade under without having an influence over them. Is there any suggestion that would not be the case?
Absolutely. That means that you've misunderstood how the European Union works, and the advisors to your party are not explaining what the single market is. The single market is first a free trade area that stretches all the way from Turkey right through to Norway and excludes only two countries, I believe that's Kazakhstan and Russia. And so we would be part of that free trade area if we left the European Union. We can improve it by having a free trade arrangement that we have 2-year periods. What we would accept, though, is that we wouldn't have have people like myself as an MEP looking at the regulations coming down from the Commission. No different than where we are in Canada or the United States or other countries in the world. Canada is able to enter the single market, and yet they're not members of the European Union. So what difference would it make? We would still be trading, we just wouldn't have the influence in relation to the regulations. And the one point I would make on that is when it comes down to those regulations, your party as and others support the idea we actually have influence. I can tell you from an MEP, we have none at all.
Stephen, your chance to put a question back to Tristram Hunt.
Yes, there were 2 points on there, Tristan. The first is that you said that we would no longer virtually have access to the European Union. We would be excluded from that market. Are you really saying that if we left the European Union, there would be no trade with the European Union or any of those countries, notwithstanding the fact that the United Kingdom is the largest trading country for Germany, that we are the largest trading partner for Europe, and that they have in excess of around 88 billion trade difference? Is the contention of the Remain Party and Remain organisations that we would not have any trade whatsoever? Because that's what you seem to say by excluded.
Well, this is the really interesting issue because we simply don't know. It is quite literally a leap in the dark. We don't know what Brexit will look like. Will we have to enter into years and years and years of negotiations to have the kind of very favourable trade we have at the moment with a single market? Will we be like Canada, as you suggest, taking 7 years to get into this kind of situation? Will we have the kind of advantages which see Jaguar Land Rover, for example, invest in the West Midlands to help my constituency in Stoke-on-Trent, create jobs and enterprise there in order to export into the single market? My view is that lots of those companies will simply want to base themselves on the continent rather than in Britain, all of which is, to my mind, a very, very unnecessary and dangerous risk with people's lives and prosperity. So I would say we all have frustrations with the European Union. We all want reform. We want reform of our local councils. We want reform of our UK Parliament. We want reforms of the European Union. But to exclude ourselves potentially from that extraordinary market would be a leap in the dark.
Tristram, we've got time for one last round of questions, but I'd ask you both to keep it very short. Quick one from you to Stephen, and then Stephen back to Tristram.
Can I just address this issue of immigration? That if we excluded ourselves from the European Union and had a Brexit, do you think that we will be able to renegotiate a relationship with the European Union which would exclude Britain being subject to the free movement of people?
I actually think that we can, and I think this would be the most fair and ethical immigration policy that we do so. What I find frustrating is that at the moment our immigration policy seems to say EU citizens good, non-EU citizens bad. My perfect ideal for an immigration system in the United Kingdom would be able to treat every country equally, irrespective of where they come from, what religion, what background, what nation, so that we're looking at the skills that they have. And they can't do that while we have an immigration system that promotes European Union citizens, those compared to those across the rest of the world. And what I do believe is that if we're outside of the European Union, as part of our free trade arrangements, we would set up that equal ethical migration system that says all are welcome, irrespective of where
Stephen,
you're from.
we're really close up to time. Your opportunity, last very quick question and a really quick answer, please.
Okay. You talk about reform in the EU. Can you name me one piece of legislation that's ever been reformed from the EU and any that's on the cards?
Well, I think the reforms the Prime Minister set out in terms of the digital economy, the reforms the Prime Minister set out in terms of deepening the single market, the reforms in terms of what the City of London needs, all of that is exactly what Britain should be pushing for. But we can only do that if we're at the table. If we have no say at the table and we're just paying in, we won't have the reforms that Britain needs.
Tristram Hunt, Steven Woolfe, thank you both very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Tristan. Appreciate it.